Hello everyone, I'm Luke from AeroInterView TV, and today I am joined by the 2025 Typhoon Display Pilot, Squadron Leader Nathan Shawyer. So, first of all, Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. It's amazing to have you here. So, how is the display workup going for your 2025 season?
Thanks very much, Luke. Yeah, it's a pleasure to chat to you guys today. So thanks very much for the invite and the platform to be able to talk. It's great. Yeah, the display is going very well, thank you. Yeah, I'm into the final stages of the workup now. So I've got my public display authority next week, actually. So I'm right at the end of it all, and it's all going very well. But lots of fun, as I'm sure you can appreciate.
Absolutely, and best of luck, obviously, with PDA next week. We'll be keeping an eye on that. Um, but yeah, so if we just go back a few years, I suppose, before you got into obviously displaying the Typhoon. So if we go back a number of years, when was it that you kind of first realised that you wanted to be a pilot and to join the Air Force?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in aviation and flying in some regards for a long period of time. When I was a little boy looking up at the sky and seeing planes fly around, it was always something that piqued my interest. I think it really got serious for me when I was kind of into my sort of 12, 13, 14, 15 kind of years. I went to some air shows with my dad. I'm from Devon personally, and Yeovilton Air Show was quite a big thing at the time that I went to. And also REAP, the air tattoo, which again was kind of an annual pilgrimage that I'd make with my dad, and we'd go and watch these jets do their thing. And that really kind of cemented the curiosity that I had to go and fly in the future. Never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be a participant one day in one of these shows, but I just loved that world and wanted to get involved with it. So very much keen to join the Royal Air Force from a young age. And alongside going to air shows, I joined the Air Cadets as well. And again, that was a really good stepping stone for me to join the RAF and kind of keep that development of my interest going in the world of aviation, and particularly jets, which I've always been very interested in.
Oh, amazing! Absolutely, yeah. I've heard so many success stories from the Air Cadets. It really is a great taster, if you like, to how Air Force life is, I suppose, from such a young age. Because
Yeah,
anybody can join from the age of 12, 13, am I right? Up until the age of about
yeah,
17, 18.
yeah, exactly. I think it's 13 to 18, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. So, after Air Cadets years, and when you eventually did join the Air Force, so I presume you were above 18 when you joined?
Yeah, exactly. So I went to Exeter College, got some A levels. I didn't actually go to university, so I didn't get a degree. A lot of people do that nowadays, get a degree and then join after that. For me personally, I always considered doing the university path, but I thought, well, I might as well throw everything I've got into an application when I'm 16, 17, again, try and go through that way and try and get it in when I'm 18. And if it doesn't work out, I've always have a second bite of the cherry later on. Luckily for me, it did work out. I obviously got selected to join the RAF as a pilot, and I joined the RAF in 2009. Which is, yeah, a good 15, 16 years ago now, which is crazy to think about. And then from there, really, I kind of trod the well-trodden path of many sort of vice pilots through their years. So started with officer training at Cranwell. That took me just under a year or so to get through, and then I actually stayed at Cranwell to do my elementary flying training, which at the time was on the Grob Shooter, a fantastic little aircraft to go and learn how to fly in. And again, I was probably quite nervous at the time because a lot of my colleagues had flown different types before, maybe a bit of experience through university air squadrons and things like that, and I didn't have any of that, so I was pretty nervous and intimidated going in. But actually, the aircraft's really good kind of platform to learn how to fly, and the Air Force training system is built around someone who has never flown before. So even though it's quite intimidating at first, you get into your stride quite quickly, and they teach you with some really good instruction how to be a pilot and learn to fly. So I went through elementary flying training. Again, that's where we get streamed. So at the time, aspired to do jets, but never really thought I was good enough. But I actually found during elementary flying training that once I got to grips with it, that kind of second half of the course really accelerated for me, and I ended up doing quite well towards the end of it, which ultimately led to me being streamed to fast jet, which was an absolute boyhood dream come true at that point. I was very excited to get that news. Following on from there, I went to RAF Lintel News to fly the Tucano. Again, a fantastic aircraft, unfortunately no longer in service, but a really good pilot's plane, very mechanically driven. You get a real feel for flying that aircraft. And it's also the first time you're introduced to kind of tactical flying, so some low level routing and trying to hit a target on time, all that sort of stuff, which was, again, really exciting at the time to be part of. After that, I moved to RAF Valley and did my advanced jet training. First time actually flying a proper jet. Which to me is the Hawk T2, so the newer variant of the model with all the kind of new glass cockpit and the nice integration ready for Typhoon with a synthetic radar and data link and all that sort of stuff. And again, just every stage of flying training, kind of a new step up, a new challenge. Everything gets a bit faster, a bit lower, a bit more exciting, a bit more complicated. The cockpit, a lot more going on. The workload goes up. But equally, because it's that stepping stone approach, you feel a bit more experienced. Your airmanship's increasing and your hours are increasing. So a really nice kind of tailored approach to getting you up to speed on something that starts to get pretty complicated to fly. Following the Hawk, I then got streamed onto my first platform, which for me was the Tornado GR4. And I was actually the last ever RAF pilot to be trained on the Tornado GR4 at the time. So I was actually, I won't lie, initially quite gutted to get streamed Tornado because all my mates had gone Typhoon. And I thought, oh, you know, I'm missing out on a really cool high performance jet. Turns out going Tornado was the best thing I could possibly have hoped for at the time. It was just incredible. Really good couple of years down at Marham. So I went to Lost to the operational conversion unit, did my training up there, and then down to Marham on 31 Squadron, the Gold Stars, and had an absolute great 2.5 years there. Loads of operational flying out over the Middle East, doing some very interesting stuff, and then the wind down of the aircraft. So getting to do the finale kind of fly past. We flew a 3-ship around the country to all the different places, and I was part of that, etc. So it was a really interesting time to be part of that force, and a really great honour to do some of the cool things on Tornado, which I'll never be able to do again. So things like the terrain following radar, flying at low level at night in dodgy weather, and the jet kind of flying you through valley systems, sat there as a passenger watching it happen around you. It's just an incredible thrill, which you know, we don't have on Typhoon and other platforms don't have. So really lucky to enjoy that and get loads of experience from Tornado while I did. But obviously it wasn't to be a Tornado career. The 2019 the jet was done and folded. So for me, that meant transitioning across to Typhoon, which so I got my kind of dream at the end of it all, which was great, and end up on 29 Squadron for the operational conversion in 2019. I went through as a student, got trained up on the Typhoon about 6 months or so, and then moved across to my next frontline unit, which was number 3 Squadron at Coningsby. And again, a really interesting 3 years there. Particularly involving things like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where we did lots of operational flying out over Eastern Europe at the time. Went to the Falklands, did some Baltic air policing, did Op Shader, so again, Iraq and Syria out of Cyprus, etc. So a very varied but interesting tour with lots going on in current world affairs at the time, before I then eventually, in 2022, came back to 29 Squadron as an instructor, and that's where I work now. As an instructor, training the next generation of guys and girls how to fly and ultimately fight in the Typhoon.
Sounds like quite an amazing career, and actually not a huge amount of years. You've done quite a lot of stuff already. So having experience on both Tornado and Typhoon, how do the jets differ? Is there any similarity between them, or is it completely like learning to fly a fast jet again when you go from the Tornado to the Typhoon?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's they are very different. It has to be said. I mean, you're still flying a jet ultimately, so comparable kind of speeds and performance in many respects, especially at low level. But the Typhoon is just kind of another level in terms of what it can do, in terms of the power and the agility, and some of the bits that I'll talk about a bit later when it comes to showing off that aircraft in a display environment. You know, work very well suited to that jet because the Typhoon is an absolute powerhouse. The Tornado, by comparison, you know, it may have lacked in power and performance. It had a lot of character and it had a lot more kind of feel to the jet. So a lot more mechanically built, and you could kind of feel the aircraft kind of shuddering around you. It wasn't carefree handling, so you have to look after the jet, you have to look after her. She had G limits, speed limits, you know, all sorts of wing sweep limits and flap limits and gear limits. Typhoon is very much built around looking after the pilot, so I don't have to do a lot in Typhoon. She'll look after me, and that means that a lot of my capacity, which would be spent on a Tornado just concentrating on flying the thing and a backseater helping me out with stuff, the Typhoon, you're on your own and the workload is a lot higher. So there's a lot more going on in terms of radar systems, weapon systems, fuel management, all the other stuff that makes the actual flying itself kind of almost secondary in the Typhoon, because it's actually a very straightforward jet to fly because she looks after you. So So very different in that respect. You have to kind of give a lot more of your capacity to flying a Tornado. It's a lot more difficult to fly, but a lot more rewarding in many respects because you can kind of really feel the aircraft around you. Typhoon, a lot more electric, a lot more stuff going on, a lot more performance, a lot more power, and a lot more carefree handling. But as a result of that, you've kind of got a lot more to do with the workload that's not necessarily just flying. So definitely a different feel to the aircraft. I'm very honoured to have had the go at both.
Amazing, absolutely. And for those that don't know what carefree handling means, essentially that means you can do whatever you want with the jet and it won't let you do anything that's going to put it or yourself in danger. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, and again, that lends itself to display very well for me this year, which is great because it makes my life a lot easier. But yeah, it ultimately means that if I put it in a tactical kind of context in a dogfight, if I roll into a fight with a hostile and I can just pull and push and throw the jet around as much as I want, and it'll give me up to the maximum G that it can possibly give me at that time, whether that's 9 or if it's a lower G if we're up high or whatever it happens to be, and same with the -3 as well. So there's no limits, wing speed limits, speed limits. I can throw the jet around, and if I'm doing Mach 1.2 and I full backstick it, that's fine. The jet will just taper the amount of control authority it gives to the control surfaces to manage that for me, so I don't have to worry about overstressing bits of the aircraft. That also goes to the throttles as well. In Tornado, bless her, if I'd thrown the throttles forward into reheat, back out again, then back into reheat like I do on the display, she'd just have a massive pop surge. The fuel demand and the air and the mix and the engines just wouldn't be able to cope, and she would go through, basically a small controlled explosion will ripple through the engine and cause potentially quite a lot of damage. So Typhoon just doesn't let you do that. So there's multiple times in the display when I'm throwing the throttles quite aggressively forward and back, depending on the maneuvers that I'm doing, and she will schedule the fuel flow and look after all that side of the house for me, so she won't surge herself. The engines are carefree as well, which means that I can just concentrate on doing my pilot stuff up front, and she'll take my inputs and give me the best possible outcome at that time, which frees up a lot of capacity for me.
Wow, amazing. So yeah, it sounds like Typhoon really is a kind of a fighter pilot's dream, really. You can do whatever you want with it and it's going to look after you and give you the maximum it can. So aside from the carefree handling, is there anything else that makes the Typhoon a particularly special jet for its kind of era of when it was designed, built, developed and first flew?
Yeah, so I think so when I think about display and showing off Typhoon and what I want to show the public, and it's kind of strong points. So I would definitely say they fall into two areas. The first thing we've kind of alluded to is that agility, that carefree handling, so I can really throw the jet around quite aggressively, quite low to the ground. And it allows me to do that, and it's an incredibly responsive jet to allow me to kind of snap the wings off around the corner, which is quite nice to see in the display. But the other half, which I kind of mentioned earlier but I haven't really talked about in detail, is the power. And the aircraft has an exceptional amount of excess power available to it. It's right up there with the cutting edge. Even now, the aircraft, 20, 30 years old, it's still, in terms of its engine performance, kind of cutting edge in terms of the amount of excess power it's got available to you. And hopefully that comes across in the display. And I've designed the sequence in that respect. So there's a few maneuvers during the display where I'm quite low speed, and then very quickly, once the reheat comes in, I'll transition into a really aggressive, high speed kind of environment, and vice versa. And one of the key things I tried to when I sat down and designed the display was think about kind of that rate of acceleration, because any jet can go fast. A fighter jet, if you give it enough running, can put the coals in. An F-16 will come in a couple hundred feet from a couple of miles out and be able to go really fast really quickly, because that's what jets do very well. But what Typhoon specifically does very well is get you to that speed very quickly. So I can come in at sort of 120 130 knots off a slow speed pass, light the reheat, and then go straight up into a loop from there, because it's got that excess power to power me up over the top of the loop, which a lot of jets just can't do. And the same with things like the fast pass, up to 550 600 knots. I get there in about 8 to 10 seconds, which is very, very quick, as opposed to a lot of other jets that will still get 600 knots quite happily, but it will take them a good 30 45 seconds to do so. So the jet is very responsive. It's got a lot of excess power, and that's one of the things alongside agility that I've tried to really bring to the display and show off to the public.
Amazing. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've seen quite a lot of videos of your practice displays, and it seems like you're doing an amazing job of showing off that thrust to
Thank you.
thrust to weight ratio. Am I right in thinking it's 40,000 pounds of thrust, 20,000 on each engine?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and it's not just the pounds per thrust because again, that's pretty comparable nowadays to most other jets. It's kind of how it uses that pounds per thrust. So it's all about the what's we call SEP, specific excess power. So that factors into, like you said earlier, that kind of thrust to weight ratio, which allows the Typhoon kind of in a combat scenario, if you're really low on energy, stuck at deck with a hostile, you've kind of always got in your back pocket the ability to go up, which is really nice. So you can transition the aircraft into quite an aggressive climb, and a lot of aircraft just won't be able to physically meet you on that climb, and so you'll outclimb them. And that's one of the things that we like to do when we get the chance, is to show off that excess power and climb away from a struggling hostile that's beneath you.
Amazing. No, that sounds like it really is quite. It sounds fun to fly, if that makes sense. In a obviously it's made for fighting, as you say. It's made to do a really important role, but it must be an awful lot of fun for you to be able to throw around in a display kind of environment, as opposed to the dogfighting style practices as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an awesome aircraft to show off for sure. It's designed for that agility and that power, and that makes it a very easy aircraft to display. One of the things that obviously is new to me, and most pilots don't experience this, is that proximity to the ground. So in my display, in my workup, and I'll talk about it in just a second, I'm sure, but obviously I start at height and work my way down. By the time you get to minimums where I'm at now, you're very close to the ground, and again, that allows that aircraft performance to be really heightened, because a lot of our training that we do is at height, quite understandably, because you need that kind of safety barrier in place. But when I'm max performing the aircraft now, I'm down at a couple of 100 feet above the ground, and that really again leads into that aircraft performance, that nice thick air that it loves to bite up. So yeah, it's a great aircraft to fly, and particularly low to the ground in a display environment.
Amazing. Yes, it sounds amazing. So yeah, about your display then. If we go on a little bit to how you kind of design your display. So when it comes to you sitting down, kind of designing a sequence, how much freedom do you get with that? Is it kind of you start from scratch, or is there a kind of an amount of maneuvers that you can select and pick from? So how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so yeah, great question. Ultimately, you start from scratch, and it's entirely up to you, which is the really cool thing. Having said that, there are certain maneuvers that you'd kind of be a fool not to include. So certain things like that nice high alpha pass when you come in really slowly, or a really low fast pass across the crowd line, things like that. We know from many years of experience are kind of crowd pleasers, and everyone enjoys seeing those at air shows. So you kind of have 5 or 6 maneuvers that you want in there at some point. You kind of build the rest of the sequence around that. But how you build it, the link flying, the additional maneuvers, anything that you want to bring to the party, very much up to you to design. And we're very blessed in the Typhoon world to have some really good high fidelity simulators which emulate the flight model perfectly. So I can jump in the sim in my free time and just throw something together and see, how does that fly, or how does that work? Or if I am doing something new, like an entirely new maneuver, then I'll need to have it approved first from my senior officers. So I'll fly it in the sim to a certain standard before then they're happy to see it. And that goes for the sequence as a whole. Once I've designed the sequence, they'll then approve it. And again, I'm not sure if you were going to mention it, but I was going to talk about the workup anyway and how kind of that works. But the sim's a big part of that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, if we go into the workup, that is, I suppose, quite an important part to mention, really. So yeah, if you'd like to tell us how that works for you.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just go back quickly to selection and get into where I am now, because obviously from being an instructor, so it's first thing I'd say is that to be the display pilot, you have to be an instructor on the squadron first. So there's a pool of maybe a dozen or so instructors, maybe 15 instructors that are kind of available to do the job. And then every year we go through a selection process, and we very recently just started. So just before, so Turbo was the first person to do this, and then me the second. We've started selecting a year early now. So we actually have already selected the 2026 display pilot, and I know who that is, which is great. And it allows them, and certainly for me last year, the chance to shadow the predecessor through a season. So I actually shadowed Turbo through the season, and went to places like Riyadh with him, and went to different air shows, and understood kind of his work and his workload and his weekend, kind of what that involves for him as a display pilot, which gives me a massive heads up in terms of what's coming for me next year. So it's not a complete shock, because we used to get selected and then you'd have about a few weeks, and then you'd be straight into the sim to start the design. So it gives you the time to actually appreciate what's coming. The other thing it's really good for is, just like we've spoken about, it gives you time to think about the sequence. What do I want to bring to the year? Any novel kind of ideas or new things. And I'll talk about one of the kind of new things that I'm bringing to the year shortly. But that was only possible because I shadowed Turbo last year, and a good 6 to 9 months or so of sitting down and going through kind of a year plan of what I want to bring to 2025. So that's kind of how it works for me in terms of the selection. The selection itself, a flying test, interviews, scrutiny of my career thus far. So quite an intensive day against normally 3 to 4 other candidates that are all going for it. And then you finally get selected, and obviously the world is your oyster at that point. You can enjoy a shadowing year knowing that you're kind of in the seat next year, which is really cool. When it comes to the workup, which is what you just mentioned itself, the sims, we do 6 assessed formal simulator sorties. So I'll obviously have free play before then and throw some ideas together for a sequence and write my sequence down and have a think about it. But when it comes to actually flying it in the sim, I'll do 6 simulator sorties with an approved supervisor. So my supervisors this year, I've got Turbo, who's last year's pilot. I've got Ryan Lawson, who's now actually left the RAF, but he still works alongside the RAF for British Aerospace. And he's, I think it was the 2017 Typhoon Display Pilot from memory. And then finally, the boss of the squadron, who by default is a Typhoon Display supervisor because they approve the activity that I go and do. So I've kind of got 3 supervisors that look after me. So I'll do 6 sims with any one of them, and then it gets approved at that point, so everyone's happy with the sequence and it's deemed to be safe and all the rest of it. I then get into the live environment. I fly 2 displays at 5,000 feet up away from Coningsby. So for me, that was over kind of the northeast coast, just go and practice the sequence, get used to a bit of the G and just make sure it does flow correctly and the jet responds as we expect it to. And then you go back to Coningsby and actually start flying in the overhead. So we do 10 displays at 1,500 feet. Which is very much, again, not too worried about the ground features at that point because it's quite difficult at height to kind of make it work with the runway lines, etc. It's more just about, again, the G tolerance and design, tweaking the sequence to get to a point where you're happy with it. And if there's anything that doesn't quite flow correctly, then that's the opportunity to kind of change it. Once that's done and everyone's happy and you've demonstrated that you can safely fly to 1,500 feet, you step down and do 2 displays at 500 feet. And then very quickly, normally the week after, you then clear down to minimums. Minimums for me, for anything aerobatic, so if I'm doing full looping maneuvers, then that's still down to 500 feet, any inverted flight type stuff. But anything up to 90 degrees, so any kind of max rate turns will be down to 300 feet, and any kind of flat passes will be down to 100 feet. So I'll come down to 100 feet for my high speed pass down the crowd line, for example. So that's kind of the minimums. I'll do at least 6 to 8 at minimums. I'm currently on about number 9, I think. So you tend to do a bit more before PDA, because again, at that point, then it's all just about getting comfortable and ready. And don't forget as well, I've got my full sequence, which is what you aim to do every day of the week because you love this full sequence. And it's the best chance to show off the aircraft. But actually, thank courtesy of the British weather, you need a rolling limited display and a flat display as well. So there's 3 displays, a full display, a rolling display, and a flat display, which are all similar, but obviously don't take into account any kind of vertical maneuvering and stuff. So they are slightly different. So you'll get a good mix of practicing all of those. And then by the time you get to PDA, for me next week, you've hopefully by this point had a good chance to practice all the different displays and different arrivals and departures, etc., like that. And that's kind of how I've got to where I am now.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, so it sounds like it probably goes quite quick from the first display, I would imagine, where you're so, focused and doing the practice quite regularly as well. Am I right in thinking it's about twice a week you would practice it?
Yeah, it's correct. Twice a week is the average, yeah.
So I'm aware that this year it seems you've included a manoeuvre which I've definitely never seen before, which is the crowd rear arrival.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, that's one of the things that I worked on a lot last year during Turbo's year while I was shadowing to kind of get the approvals in place from the Military Aviation Authority and from our side, from the AOC1 group, to make sure that everyone's happy. This is an activity that everyone's happy to do. The idea being that I'll start the display from behind the crown line and overfly the crowd to begin my display, which I think it's really cool to have a jet fly directly over the top of you. The reheat will be in as well, so it'll be noisy. It'll be a good chance to start the display. It'll be at 350 knots to begin and at 500 feet. The only caveat with that is if there's some venues where I'm flying over a big built-up area beforehand, then it'll probably be at 1,000 feet, not 500. So things like, for example, Eastbourne Airshow and places like that, I'm not going to be able to fly over Eastbourne at 500 feet with the afterburners in because it'll be rather distracting for a lot of people people down there. So I'll step it up slightly to 1,000. But most places, yeah, 500 feet, 350 knots, the reheat lit, and it'll be directly over the datum from behind, so over the top of the crowd, before I then go into my first maneuver, which is a roll and then straight full backstick to go up the hill for a half horizontal. And I think the idea behind that was twofold. Firstly, as we've seen from the Battle of Britain Memorial flight in the Red Arrows, it's a really cool spectacle to start the display, to actually look up and see a jet come from behind you and over the top. So that's a really good idea. And secondly, transitioning straight from that into a full backstick maneuver, I think really nicely demonstrates the plan form of the aircraft, with that nice kind of delta wing, and you obviously, hopefully on a nice vapor day, get all the fluff and the bits off the back of the jet as well. So it's a really cool way to kind of begin the display, and the only reason I was able to kind of get that approved and through is because I've kind of been working on it for quite a long time last year. So that's all been approved now, and I'm looking forward to bring that to various shows around the country this year. So maybe not all of them, but for the most part, I'd like to begin my display by doing that for sure.
Oh no, we look forward to seeing that. That'll be amazing, because we're generally positioned kind of at the datum point, really. So hopefully you'll be able to buzz us quite a few times over the season then.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
Absolutely, we look forward to that. As you say though, at Eastbourne, I believe the Wish Tower, the Martello Tower, is generally the datum, which is actually where we live stream from. But Brilliant. As you said, that'll be 1,000 feet rather than the...
Yeah, exactly. And I have other options, right? So if I'm starting the display, someone like Riyadh, I don't know how they'll feel about it. So they may want me to start my display from the runway if I'm limited on time, and I've got an option for that. I've also got an option to arrive from crowd left or right, which is what the Typhoon generally does anyway. So I have a kind of a pool of options available to me. But definitely my new idea this year is the crowd arrive, and I'll try and do that wherever I can.
I think it's a fantastic idea. It's really something novel for the Typhoon, definitely, as you say, and no, can't wait to see that. So with that freedom that you have of just designing your own display routine, presumably, obviously, you go to the air shows the previous year, you see lots of displays from other fast jets from around the world. Do you ever take any inspiration from some other jet teams and solo displays?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a specific type that I look at and think I want to emulate that, because Typhoon is kind of its own jet in its own right, and it's got its own kind of weaknesses and its own strengths to bring to a display. But you definitely get a feel from looking at other displays and seeing what they do and what they can't do, and making that work for me. So definitely, yeah, you look at the leading edge of fast jet displays. You got Rafale, F-22, the F-15 stuff at Riyadh last year was just incredible with the Qatari stuff. So some really cool stuff those jets do. Now, obviously, we're limited on Typhoon. It's really good in some areas, not so good in others. So things like high alpha performing in terms of thrust vectoring and all that really cool kind of slow speed kind of stuff that you'll see some jets do, that's just out of the picture of Typhoon. That's just not something we can bring to the party. But what we can bring to the party is a lot of power and a lot of agility, like I mentioned earlier. So I'll look at other displays as a just a spotter, really, someone who just enjoys jets on the ground and see the Rafale ripping up, doing its thing, and think, okay, what part of that did I really enjoy as a spectator, as someone that's watching the spectacle, and what bits actually I'm not that bothered by that. It didn't really appeal to me, and that kind of influences my own kind of understanding of what I want to bring to the Typhoon. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's a specific type in mind that I try and emulate or take stuff from, but you get a broad understanding of different jet displays and what looks cool and what doesn't look cool, and that kind of factors in to your own kind of sequence design.
So yeah, another thing I've noticed this year, which is slightly different to last year, is the call sign. So last year we saw Turbo 1, year before it was Anarchy 1 for a few years. This year we see that you've got Reheat 1. So did you get to choose the call sign?
Yeah, exactly that. So it was there was lots of banter flying around the office about maybe I should continue the turbo stuff and be Turbo 2, and I thought, no, I can't be sitting with that. I've got to try and find something that's new for this year and something different for me. So we bounced a few ideas around the office, because you do get quite a lot of freedom in choosing what you quite like. And again, one of the things that I really wanted to bring to display this year is kind of the reheat and the noise and the power of Typhoon. So I think reheat kind of demonstrates that quite nicely in terms of a singular name to focus our kind of theme around. And you'll see a lot of our badges this year, our kind of insignia is all built around kind of orange reheat, and there's going to be lots more stuff like that to come as well. So interestingly, it's actually an F-15 call sign from Lakenheath. I think it was the 492nd, but I'm not entirely sure. So we had to speak to those guys and effectively do a trade. So we've given them Anarchy for the year. So you might hear some F-15s called Anarchy this year, which I thought was quite funny. And we've taken the call sign reheats that fits in with our theme this year and how we're going to pedal it forward. So I can't be for sure whether next year they'll continue it or whether they'll look at something different. I'm not entirely sure. But certainly for this year, it kind of fit in with our theme quite well. So we did a trade with the F-15s and we'll be reheat for this year only.
Very cool, and I think it really does sound amazing. Hearing that on the radio, reheat running in, it just sounds great, and I think it really does
Yeah.
match the display sequence that you have designed. And yeah, like you say, plenty of reheat, plenty of noise. I think it's a perfect call sign, really.
Thank you. Cheers. I'm glad it's going on well.
Yes, absolutely. So, moving on from your display design, obviously, where you say you've shadowed turbo for a year, so you've got a taste for what is actually involved on an airshow day. So, typical airshow day for you guys, what would be kind of the first thing you do? Do you have an early start kind of things?
Yeah, so a lot of it will depend on the air show itself, and whether it's a small local show. If it's close to Coningsby, then we'll try and operate out of Coningsby where possible. So I'll operate out of the base itself. But for about half the shows, as you know, we'll kind of forward deploy somewhere. So we'll be operating out of a local airport, maybe somewhere like Liverpool, for example, to do some of the shows and such like. So again, it will depend entirely on whether we're kind of forward deployed and what's going on. The theme really is that it all kind of starts the week before. So I brief my boss before I go away every weekend on the venue, the pilot's notes, what to expect from the display, because every display area is unique. And actually, even though I've got my nice little full display that I've thrown together that I've practiced day in day out at Coningsby, that might not be appropriate for some of the display venues because they might have like an avoid in a certain area or a town that just encroaches into the display area, so I can't quite fly as far east as I normally would. So we have a briefing about a week before the event where we talk about how we're just going to maybe tweak the display. And when I say tweak, I'm not talking full maneuvers because that's too much of a change, but maybe some slight, I'm going to pull a bit more through my heading than I would normally there just to make that avoid. And I kind of brief the supervisors and the boss so they understand kind of what the weekend has in store for me. So that kind of is an early identification, really, of kind of potential hazards or things that we need to be aware of. When it comes to the weekend itself, we'll fly the jets there on the Thursday or the Friday or however it works for that venue. And then in the morning itself, I'll get a bridge to the weather, so I'll have like a weather update, and I'll start to think at that early time whether it's looking like a full display, a rolling, a flat. Things that I'm particularly interested in, things like the cloud base, the cloud structure. So and then finally the wind. And the wind has a big effect actually on what we do. Even in a typhoon, a nice powerful jet, I do get pretty slow at times, and particularly when you're slow speed, a 25-30 knot wind pushing me towards the crowd, as I had a few weeks ago during one of my practices, has quite a marked effect on you, particularly over the top of looping maneuvers. You get blown towards the crowd lines quite significantly, and I'll need to take that into account. So it'll all be kind of begin in the morning as I kind of get my head around kind of what the weather system's doing that day, what weather I'm likely to encounter that later that morning or that afternoon, depending on when the display shot is. And we've actually got a few dust displays as well this year, which would be great to do as well. So we'll do a few of those kind of plans and think about it, and then depending on the timeline, will depend on when I then go to the airport and get to the jet itself. And I'll have a normal kind of walk to the jet at a normal sort of time. So I normally walk about 40 minutes or so before takeoff. I'll walk to the jet. I'll do a walk around, I'll sign the aircraft out with the engineers, get a quick brief for them about anything that I need to be aware of in terms of the serviceability, and then jump on in and get it started up, which takes a little bit of time just to get everything checked and make sure that we're ready to go. Again, depending on whether the display is at the venue itself or somewhere else, will depend on then whether I transit and sit in a hold for a bit. My display this year is pretty thirsty on the fuel, so I used 3.2 tons of fuel on a full display, which is actually more than I think the last few years have been. A lot of reheat in there, which is again really great to see, but it does have its toll. So again, part of my planning, which is done at an earlier stage but reinforced on the day, is kind of what's my minimum fuel that I need to be back with, and then that trickles back to the display. What fuel point do I need to stop doing my display and all the rest of it, and so I can work it out from there. And again, from an early stage, I know that if I'm transiting 120 miles to a venue to display, I'm probably not going to be able to get my full display in there, so I'll look to maybe cut out a few maneuvers to make it as best I can. Or even if it's really tight, I'll just have to do a rolling display, which I know takes a lot less fuel, for example. So again, a lot of those considerations take place earlier in the week, but on the day is kind of when you really make the call and say, yeah, we're going to do this today. That is the plan. Into the jet, out to the transit, out to the hold, run in for the display itself, and then obviously transit home and report the serviceability back to the aircraft, to the engineers, who then obviously turn the jets, they service the aircraft, change the oils, and look at the fuel and all the rest of it. So lots of work behind the scenes. Hasten to add, obviously, I get to do the cool thing of jumping in and throwing it around the sky for a bit, but there's a lot of effort that goes in from the ground trade side of the house to allow that to happen and to make it, you know, safe and sustainable for display again, maybe later that day or the next morning or whatever happens to be. And that's the case, really, a case of rinse and repeat. So we'll do that during the day, and then again on the following day before we fly home. If it's a particularly big event, things like RIAT, for example, there might well be a lot of corporate pressures and sponsors as well. So I might well be doing lots of bits on the ground with some of our sponsors, and you know, some signings or some media stuff, some visits, etc. So there are lots of other things that go around the display, and certainly being a display pilot, you do get kind of torn around a bit to do lots of different things. But in terms of my primary role of displaying the aircraft, that kind of hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour of kind of what we're thinking about.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty exhausting day each time you do that. So I'd imagine once you finish your display, get out on the jet, hopefully you'd have some time to kind of, you know, wind down and kind of do a debrief, I presume, on your display, see what went well, or, you know, anything that might need to be adapted for the second day of the display and things like that. How was that process kind of work?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So certainly during the workup where I'm at the moment, everything I do is very heavily scrutinised and supervised. So I'll have a full debrief that will go on for potentially an hour or two or so to really get to the bottom of how that display went, with video footage from the outside, my heads-up camera, so I can see what it looked like from the inside. And every manoeuvre I do is kind of picked apart to make sure it's safe, sensible, and it flows nicely from one into the next. So that's very much where I'm at the workup at the moment, because it's quite forensic and detailed, because it needs to be really scrutinised to make sure I'm ready for PDA and good to go. Once I'm out to the season itself, as long as the display is all safe and I've had no concerns from a safety point of view, I was, you know, not too low, didn't bust any of my heights, didn't get too close to the crowd or anything like that at all, then that display, it's up to kind of me to internally kind of debrief myself and tweak it such. It's only if I've, you know, had any rules or the flying display director wasn't comfortable with something I did, that I'll then have my tapes pulled and we'll scrutinise that display in a bit more detail. So assuming there was nothing unsafe that occurred, any kind of little finesse points of, yeah, I come out of that roll a bit fast, or the aileron roll, I kind of overswang the jet a bit and had to correct myself. That's kind of on me to take away and debrief myself to, and I'll for sure have a good think about that afternoon once I've calmed down. And it's an important you mentioned as well about that fatigue, and that is a big thing as well. So even though the display is only, you know, 9 minutes or so long, it's pretty tiring. It's pretty brutal on the G-force. We haven't really mentioned a lot of that today, but it's a grueling experience, and you do need a bit of time, as you said, just afterwards to kind of calm down a bit and relax the body and to kind of chill out a bit, because it does take its toll. So yeah, it can be quite a long day, even though the hours worked aren't long. Just the toll on the body can be quite intense.
Absolutely. And for those that maybe don't know what G-force kind of does in the body, if you're pulling, say, positive 9 Gs, you weigh 9 times your normal weight, and the negative Gs, I've heard, are extraordinarily uncomfortable. So just as a quick summary, for those that don't know, how would you describe the feeling of those extreme G-forces?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it's part of every kind of, you know, fighter pilot's repertoire is to be aware of G-force, and we have training on it, and you're exposed to it early on in your career, and you kind of build up a natural tolerance to it, which is why I'm a reasonable point now where I can kind of deal with quite a lot of G quite comfortably, because I'm pretty much used to it. But it is uncomfortable. There's no doubt about it. We've got very good kit, so I've got a full G body covering. So I've got the full G suit, which includes the G pants themselves, which tighten up around my abdomen and my thighs. And the best way to describe it is basically as I enter a turn, so I roll the aircraft and pull back on the stick, so I'm rapidly, aggressively kind of turning around the corner, everything kind of gets shrunken down and then it's pulled down towards the bottom of the seat, so I'm compressed in quite a big way. That is uncomfortable by itself, but it also has the unfortunate event of bringing a lot of the blood pooling down towards the bottom extremities of the body and away from your brain. And if it's left unchecked, or you're not trained and your tolerance isn't very high, then that can lead to potential loss of consciousness, because the blood is draining from the head and the brain where it obviously needs to be to keep you awake. So potentially very dangerous, so you need to be very much aware of it. And a lot of my kind of training up to this point, and certainly in the early part of the workup, has been dealing with that G-force, which is significantly higher in a display than a normal pilot would be exposed to. So the best way I can describe it really is just kind of tensing up to kind of raise from imagine if you're, I don't know, down the pub late at night and you offended someone and you're about to take a hit to the gut. It's that kind of like feeling of tensing up. So you just tense up your abdomen, your stomach, your core. You engage your core body, the thighs as well, and you just kind of squeeze and tense. And that kind of helps the blood to stop it pooling down in the lower extremities because you tense against it. The jet helps as well because, like I said, I've got my G pants on. So when it identifies that I'm pulling G, I get high pressured air go into all those kind of G pockets that inflate quite rapidly, and naturally that has the effect again of kind of helping you tense up and brace yourself for the G that's coming on. So yeah, that's positive G up to +9. And the brutal thing about Typhoon is that it won't just touch 9 and bleed away. She'll happily stay at 9, and a lot of my maneuvers are sustained 9. So that max rate turn I do towards the end, and then I let it off into a really high energy big barrel roll, that's 9G throughout that entire time. So it's about 25 seconds of just sustained 9G. And the brutal thing about Typhoon, around the back of the max rate turn, I actually have to come out of reheat just to give something back to the jet and then go back into reheat, because she'll accelerate the whole time. So even at 9G, she'll keep accelerating, and you'll eventually just smash through the sound barrier, which would be very cool for an air show. But I don't think the organisers would be particularly thrilled with the sonic boom at 300 feet. So it's a brutal experience. And then finally, just to finish off, that negative G, yeah. So imagine everything inverted now. So you push on the aircraft, so you roll and you push away. And I've actually got two different areas in my full display where I got up to -3G, and again that's the opposite. So all the blood is now going into my head, and again a bit of tensing is required. But -3 is just as brutal as +9 at that point, because everything's kind of working against you, and you rise up into your straps, and you have to really hold yourself down and work against that G-force. So the positive G is more of like kind of a workout, and you have to work hard for it. The negative G is more of just kind of an uncomfortable sensation as everything kind of is going the wrong way.
Wow, that does sound uncomfortable, definitely. Yes.
It's a lot of fun. I've made it sound horrible. You do build up a tolerance, and you do kind of enjoy it at the same time. But yeah, it's important to note that it is a workout for sure during a display. It's not a walk in the park. It's
no,
quite
absolutely.
tiring.
You have to be, I'm sure, very fit, very healthy, and that is super important to be able to, as you say, sustain those kind of Gs for extended periods of times. And
yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Yeah. So just going back a little bit, where you said obviously every venue is slightly different. I'm sure every display you enjoy just as much, but is there any venues you're particularly excited about displaying at?
Yeah, so I guess from a sentimental point of view, from my sort of house, my first display is down at Torbay at the English Riviera show, and that's kind of like almost hometown for me. I'm from a place called Honiton, just near Exeter, and my family are all coming down to that one to watch me, and that's my kind of first big public show. And the venue's really nicely designed. The cove is just the right sort of size to fit a Typhoon display in, and it should be quite a nice spectacle. So from a kind of sentimental point of view, I'm really looking forward to that one, kind of getting out and properly displaying for the first time in front of the public. There are other kind of highlights of the year. I mentioned earlier the dust displays. So I think I can't remember exactly. I think we're doing Isle of Man TT classic races this year for the first time. We've not done that one before, and that's a dusk display, which will be quite nice to do out over the water, as well as some other events. I think Prestwick and the air show up north as well is also a dust display. So anything that's slightly different, displaying in dusk, really accentuating that kind of reheat, and the pictures I'll hopefully get from that will be pretty cool to enjoy for sure. So those are the kind of big shows, as well as obviously things like Riat and Cosford, which are big ones on the calendar that we always look forward to every year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the dust displays that you mentioned, they really are something that probably one of my airshow highlights of all time, seeing the Typhoon dust displays at Bournemouth over the last few years.
Yes.
I mean, sadly, there's no longer Bournemouth, but we're hoping, maybe in the future Bournemouth will return and we'll be.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. It's definitely a high point. It was obviously really sad news for us not to be able to display there this year, but I'm hopeful that hopefully in the future things will get back on track, and we'll be able to bring the Typhoon in the evening again, because it's a lot of fun to display for sure.
Absolutely. And yeah, if we just kind of go through to now, you being the display pilot, talking about yourself being at the air shows when you were a young 12, 13-year-old, what is there anything you're particularly hoping to achieve being a display pilot yourself now, to inspire the next generation? Or how does that kind of for you feel to be in that role, to have hundreds of thousands of people seeing you over the year?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to answer. I just say, really, I just hope that younger people, like you kind of allude to already, that go to these shows and see me do my thing, realize that I was just like them not long ago. And it's very much an achievable dream that if you set your mind to it, you button down, do your bits at school, go to college, do all the bits you need to do, and you're passionate and you're enthusiastic and you really want to do it, then it's absolutely within the realms of possibility. I certainly had this kind of barrier when I was younger, thinking that looks like an incredible job. There's no way that I'd be able to end up doing something like that, but I'll research it anyway and put my nose in and see what it's all about. And look where I am now. I've managed to crack on and make it work. So it's definitely achievable. I'd say try your best to make things work for you. So things like air cadets, like I mentioned already, are really good stepping stones to join the RAF, and it'll broaden your understanding and experience of the Royal Air Force as well. So don't expect to turn up to the careers office and walk into a job. It's a competitive job that you need to prepare for, but it's absolutely achievable. And to anyone that goes to these shows and when they're younger and looks up and thinks I want to do that, hopefully my kind of story and what I've talked about today, like you said, kind of inspires people to think, oh, okay, that is achievable. That is something that I could maybe set my sights on doing myself in the next 10 years or so, because it is definitely something that I didn't realise was even a possibility when I was younger. I just lived in awe of fast jets and thought they were incredible. Never thought I'd actually get my hands on one, and heaven forbid, absolutely never thought I'd have the honour of displaying one. So it's definitely achievable. And if I've inspired even just a handful of young boys and girls from across the country to apply, then I'll be a very happy man come the end of the year.
Yeah. Well, that sounds amazing, and I'm sure you will do just that. It's been an absolute honour to have you, chat with us today, Nathan. Thank you so much for taking the time. We really are excited to see you at Torbay. We're there as well for one of your first major displays. Will be there. So we are very excited, and thank you so much once again.
No problem at all. Pleasure, and thanks for having me on. It's been good to talk.